The silence in the cockpit of the Gulfstream G650ER was louder than the jet engines spooling up outside on the Teterboro tarmac. Captain Richard Vance didn't just look angry. He looked insulted. His hand hovered over the master switch, but he refused to engage it. He turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing at the woman sitting in the right-hand seat. She was black, young, and wearing the 4 stripes of a captain, stripes he believed she had stolen, not earned. "I'm going to make this very clear," Richard snarled, his voice low and vibrating with disdain. "I don't fly with diversity hires. And I certainly don't fly with little girls playing dress-up. Get out of my cockpit before I have security drag you down the stairs." He thought he held all the cards. He thought he was the god of this aircraft. He had no idea that the woman he was spitting venom at didn't just know how to fly the plane. She held the deed to the very seat he was sitting in. The rain at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was relentless. A cold, gray sheet that turned the tarmac into a sleek, dark mirror, reflecting the navigation lights of parked private jets. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of morning that felt heavy, damp, and unforgiving. Inside the FBO, fixed base operator, lounge of Meridian Aviation, the air smelled of expensive coffee and leather polish. It was a quiet morning, reserved for the elite and the people paid to transport them. Maya Sterling stood near the reception desk, reviewing the weather reports on her iPad. She adjusted the cuff of her blazer. Her uniform was immaculate, crisp navy blue, perfectly tailored, with the golden wings of a senior pilot pinned precisely above her left pocket. At 28 years old, Maya had a face that often made people underestimate her. She had soft features and a calm demeanor that hid a razor-sharp intellect and thousands of flight hours. But today, she wasn't just a pilot. She was something else entirely, though nobody in the lounge knew it yet. The glass doors slid open, and Captain Richard Vance strode in. Richard was a legend in his own mind. A 55-year-old veteran with silver hair combed back in a style that hadn't changed since the late 90s, and a jawline that seemed permanently set in a clench. He walked with the heavy, boot-stomping confidence of a man who had never been told no in his entire professional life. He had flown for major commercial airlines for 30 years before retiring to the lucrative world of private charters. Rumor had it he was forced out of commercial aviation for behavioral issues, but in the private sector, his skills were undeniable, even if his personality was toxic. He tossed his flight bag onto a leather armchair and approached the reception desk, completely ignoring Maya, who was standing 2 feet away. Refuel should be done by now. Richard barked at the young receptionist, a girl named Kelly, who looked terrified of him. "And tell catering if they put kale in the wraps again, I'm throwing the box onto the runway." "Yes, Captain Vance, everything is ready," Kelly stammered. "Your first officer is already here." Richard frowned, turning his head slightly. He scanned the room, looking past Maya, his eyes searching for a man. "Where?" "I don't see him. Don't tell me operations sent me another invisible rookie." "I'm right here, Captain Vance," Maya said. Her voice was steady, calm, and possessed a timbre of authority that usually made people pay attention. Richard turned slowly. He looked at Maya's boots, traveled up her pressed trousers, past the gold stripes on her sleeves, and finally met her eyes. His expression wasn't one of recognition, it was one of pure, unadulterated confusion mixed with disgust. He let out a short, sharp scoff. "You?" "Maya Sterling," she said, extending a hand. "I'm slotted as your SIC, second in command, for the flight to London today." Richard didn't take her hand. He stared at it as if she were offering him a dead fish. He looked back at Kelly. "Is this a joke? Is the scheduling software broken again?" "No, sir," Kelly said, her voice shaking. "Ms. Sterling is on the manifest. She's fully rated for the G650. Richard turned his back on Maya, addressing the receptionist again. "Get Gary on the phone, now. I specifically requested a competent flight deck. I'm not running a flight school for affirmative action quotas." The room went deadly silent. A businessman in the corner lowered his newspaper. Maya didn't flinch. She slowly lowered her hand, her expression hardening. My ratings are higher than yours, Richard, Maya said, dropping the shippiche. Captain, and I suggest you check your tone. We have a departure slot in 45 minutes. Richard spun around, stepping into her personal space. He smelled of stale tobacco and arrogance. Listen to me, sweetheart. I don't care what online course you took or who you slept with to get those stripes. The G650 is a $60 million machine, not a Toyota Camry. You don't belong in the front. You belong in the back serving drinks. Now sit down and shut up while I get a real pilot. Maya watched him walk away, pulling out his phone to scream at the chief pilot. She felt the heat rising in her chest, the familiar sting of prejudice she had fought her entire career. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't just an employee. She reached into her pocket and touched the cold metal of a USB drive attached to her keychain. Take your time, Richard, she whispered to herself. Dig the hole as deep as you want. 20 minutes later, the issue had not been resolved. The chief pilot, Gary O'Connell, had evidently told Richard that there was no one else available. The roster was locked. If Richard wanted to fly and collect his massive paycheck for this transatlantic charter, he had to fly with Maya. Richard stormed out to the aircraft, a sleek Gulfstream G650ER with the tail number N770MS. He walked up the air stairs without waiting for Maya, disappearing inside. Maya followed. She greeted the flight attendant, Sarah, a kind woman in her 40s who looked apologetic. He's in a mood, Sarah whispered, handing Maya a bottle of water. He kicked the catering cart. I can handle him, Maya said, offering a tight smile. Is the passenger manifest confirmed? Yes. One VIP, Mr. Harrison Thorne, tech billionaire. He's running late, arriving in 15 minutes. Maya nodded. Perfect. She entered the cockpit. It was a technological marvel, a sanctuary of glass displays, glowing buttons, and beige leather. Richard was already in the left seat, the captain's seat. He was aggressively punching coordinates into the Flight Management System, FMS. Maya placed her flight bag down and slid into the right seat. She began her pre-flight flow, moving her hands with practiced efficiency. Battery switches on. APU start. Check hydraulics. Richard stopped typing. He slammed his hand onto the center console, covering the buttons Maya needed to access. Don't touch anything, he ordered. Maya stopped, her hand hovering in the air. I'm running the pre-flight, Captain. Unless you want to explain a delay to the client. I don't want you touching my aircraft, Richard spat. He turned his chair to face her, his face flushing red. Let's get one thing straight. Management might have forced you onto this roster because they're terrified of a lawsuit, but up here, I am the law. You do not talk on the radio. You do not touch the flight controls. You sit on your hands and you look out the window. If you so much as sneeze while we are on final approach, I will have your license pulled. Maya looked at him, analyzing him. He was terrified. He was a man seeing his world change and hating every second of it. But his fear was manifesting as dangerous aggression. Is it because I'm black? Maya asked calmly. Or is it because I'm a woman? I'm just trying to understand which specific bias is compromising your ability to operate this aircraft safely. Richard's eyes bulged. How dare you? I have 30,000 hours. And a record of 3 HR complaints for harassment in the last 2 years. Maya countered, reciting the file she had read the night before. And a forced resignation from Delta in 2018 for insubordination. Richard went rigid. Who told you that? It's a small world, Richard. Aviation is a village. You listen to me, he hissed, unbuckling his seatbelt and leaning in, his finger inches from her face. I don't know who you think you are, but you are nothing. You are a diversity checkmark. I have flown presidents and kings. You are a liability. I refuse to fly with you. I am calling Gary again, and I am telling him that I deem you psychologically unfit for duty. Unfit? Maya laughed, a cold, dry sound. Because I know your history? Because you are insubordinate, Richard shouted. Now get out! Get off my flight deck! No, Maya said. She crossed her arms. I have a job to do. And frankly, Captain, you're the one acting unstable. Richard's face turned a shade of purple Maya hadn't thought possible. He grabbed the cockpit phone handset to call the ground crew.
"Get the stairs back down! I'm removing a crew member!"
At that moment, a sleek black Mercedes Maybach pulled up to the aircraft on the tarmac below. The VIP, Harrison Thorne, had arrived. Richard saw the car through the side window. He panicked. He couldn't make a scene in front of a billionaire client. He slammed the phone down. "We will discuss this in London," Richard growled. "But if you touch the yoke, I will break your fingers." "We'll discuss it sooner than that," Maya said softly. The boarding process was tense. Harrison Thorne, a man in his early 50s wearing a cashmere sweater and carrying an air of relaxed power, boarded the jet. He nodded to Sarah and glanced toward the cockpit. Richard put on his fake captain's face. He stepped out of the cockpit to greet the VIP, forcing a painfully wide smile. "Mr. Thorne, welcome aboard," Richard boomed, his voice dropping an octave to sound commanding. "Apologies for the weather, but we'll have you above the clouds in no time. Smooth ride all the way to London Luton." Harrison Thorne paused. He looked at Richard, then looked past him into the cockpit, where Maya was quietly reviewing the weight and balance data. "Good morning," Harrison said, his eyes lingering on Maya for a split second before returning to Richard. "I trust everything is in order. I have a merger meeting tonight." "I cannot be late." "Absolutely, sir. The aircraft is pristine," Richard said. "Just a minor crew adjustment issue, but we are ready to push back." Harrison nodded and took his seat in the main cabin. Sarah closed the main cabin door. The heavy thud of the locking mechanism echoed through the fuselage. Richard returned to the cockpit and slammed the door behind him, locking them in. The small space felt like a cage. "Don't speak to him," Richard warned Maya as he strapped himself in. "Don't look at him." "We need to run the before-start checklist," Maya said, holding up the laminated card. "I'll do it myself," Richard muttered. He began flipping switches rapidly, skipping items, moving too fast. "You skipped the hydraulic pump check," Maya noted. "I checked it earlier." "Standard operating procedure requires a cross-check," Maya said firmly. "Richard, you are flying emotionally. That is dangerous." "Stop telling me how to fly," he screamed, slamming his hand on the glare shield. Suddenly, the cockpit interphone chimed. It was the ground crew. Richard put on his headset. "Go ahead, ground." "Captain, this is Gary O'Connell from operations," the voice crackled in his ear. "We have a problem." Richard rolled his eyes. "What now, Gary? Did you find a replacement for her?" He gestured at Maya with his thumb. "No, Richard. Listen to me carefully." Gary's voice sounded strained, nervous. "We just got a call from the aircraft registry. There is a hold on the flight release." "A hold? What for? The maintenance logs are clear." "It's not maintenance," Gary said. "It's an ownership issue. The title transfer for N770MS was finalized this morning. The new owner has flagged the flight." Richard groaned. "Who is the new owner? Thorne? Is he buying the jet?" "No, Thorne is just chartering," Gary said. "The new owner is a holding company called Sterling Aviation Assets, LLC. Richard froze. He blinked. He slowly turned his head to the right. Maya Sterling was sitting there, looking at her nails. She wasn't wearing a headset, but she didn't need to. She knew exactly what Gary was saying. "Sterling," Richard whispered into the mic. "Gary, did you say Sterling?" "Yeah, Sterling Aviation. They bought the bird from the leasing company yesterday for $42 million cash. They put a do-not-fly order on it until the owner personally signs off on the crew." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. The name on the manifest. Maya Sterling. He looked at her, really looked at her. Maya turned to face him. Her expression was no longer one of a subordinate trying to prove herself. It was the look of a predator watching a wounded animal. "Is there a problem, Richard?" she asked innocently. "You," Richard stammered, his hand shaking near the throttle. "You're related to them, the owners." Maya smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Gary," she said loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Can you hear me?" Gary's voice came through the cockpit speaker. "Maya?" "Yes, Miss Sterling, I can hear you. Is everything okay?" "No, Gary." Maya said, her eyes locked on Richard's pale face. Everything is not okay. The pilot in command is refusing to follow standard operating procedures, has verbally abused the co-pilot, and just attempted to bypass the hydraulic safety check. I am not signing off on this flight release. Richard dropped the headset. It clattered against the center console. You own this plane? Richard whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the avionics cooling fans. Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, towering over him in the small space. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the finalized bill of sale, slamming it onto the instrument panel right in front of him. I don't just own the plane, Richard, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I own the airline. The cockpit was silent, save for the rhythmic humming of the avionics cooling fans, but the air pressure inside felt like it had dropped to zero. Richard Vance stared at the document on the center console, the bill of sale. The header was embossed with the seal of the Federal Aviation Administration, and the signature at the bottom, in sharp, decisive ink, read Maya Sterling, CEO, Sterling Aviation Assets. Richard's brain was misfiring. He looked at the document, then at Maya, then back at the document. His world, built on 30 years of unearned superiority and rigid hierarchies, was cracking down the middle. This is a fake, Richard croaked, his voice lacking its usual booming quality. He looked desperate, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool air conditioning. You printed this out. It's a prank. Gary put you up to this, didn't he? He grabbed the headset from where it had fallen. Gary, tell me this is a joke. Tell me you didn't sell the company to her. Gary's voice came through the speaker, sounding exhausted and distant. It's not a joke, Richard. The acquisition was finalized yesterday afternoon. Sterling Aviation bought out the entire charter fleet. We all work for her now. Well, I do. I'm not sure about you anymore. Richard dropped the headset again. He looked at Maya, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. You set me up. I didn't set you up, Richard, Maya said, her voice terrifyingly calm. She sat back in the co-pilot's seat, but she looked like a queen on a throne. I scheduled myself on this flight to evaluate the assets I just purchased. I wanted to see how my pilots operate. I wanted to see the culture of the company I just spent $42 million acquiring. And what did I find? She leaned forward, her dark eyes piercing him. I found a captain who refuses to follow safety protocols because his ego is too big for the cockpit. I found a man who abuses his colleagues based on their gender and race. I found a liability. I am the best pilot in this fleet, Richard shouted, his face turning a mottled red. You can't fire me right before a flight! We have Harrison Thorne in the back. If we delay, he walks. You lose the contract. You need me. He smirked, a grotesque expression of returning confidence. He thought he had found leverage. That's right. You can't fly this bird alone. Standard operating procedure requires 2 pilots. And there's no one else. So, boss, he sneered the word, unless you want to lose your first big client on day 1, you're going to sit there, shut up, and let me fly my plane. Maya looked at him for a long moment. She checked her watch. Then she looked at the door. There was a polite but firm knock. The cockpit door opened. Harrison Thorne stood there, holding a crystal tumbler of sparkling water. The billionaire looked between the 2 pilots, sensing the thick tension. Captain Vance, Harrison said, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of impatience. We are 20 minutes past our slot. Is there a mechanical issue, or do I need to call my own pilot to bring my jet around? Richard plastered on his fake smile again, turning in his seat. Mr. Thorne! No mechanical issues. Just finalizing some paperwork. We'll be pushing back in 5 minutes. Good, Harrison said. He looked at Maya. Is everything all right, First Officer? Maya stood up. She smoothed her blazer. Actually, Mr. Thorne, there has been a slight change in the crew configuration. Captain Vance was just feeling a bit unwell. Not unfit to fly, but not up to the demands of command. Richard's head snapped toward her. What are you saying? Maya ignored him. She looked directly at Richard. Get out of that seat, Richard. Excuse me? You heard me, Maya said, her voice hard as steel. You are demoted. Effective immediately, I am the pilot in command of this flight. You will fly as second in command. You will work the radios. You will handle the fuel logs. And you will not touch the flight controls unless I command you to. Now, switch seats. Richard laughed nervously, looking at Harrison for support. Mr. Thorne, she's joking. She's a junior pilot. She can't. Actually, Harrison interrupted, taking a sip of his water. I believe she can. If she owns the plane, she decides who sits where. And frankly, Vance, you look like you're about to have a stroke. I'd feel safer with her flying. Harrison gave Maya a small, knowing nod, a gesture Richard missed in his panic, and closed the door. Richard was cornered. If he refused, he would be fired for insubordination and likely blacklisted for abandoning a flight with a VIP on board. If he walked off, his career was over. But if he stayed, he had to serve her. I will not, Richard whispered, shaking. I will not sit in the right seat for you. Then get off my plane, Maya said, pointing to the exit, and leave your ID badge on the console. Because if you walk off, you're done in aviation. I will personally write the report to the FAA detailing your instability. Richard stared at the open door. He thought about his alimony payments. He thought about his second mortgage. He thought about the reputation he had built. Slowly, painfully, he unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up, his knees popping. He squeezed past Maya in the narrow space, their shoulders brushing. He smelled of sweat and fear. Maya didn't move until he was out of the seat. Then, she sat down in the left seat, the captain's seat. She adjusted the pedals. She adjusted the mirrors. She put on the headset. Richard slumped into the right seat, the first officer station. He looked smaller, deflated. Checklist, Maya ordered, not looking at him. Richard hesitated. I said, checklist, first officer. Maya repeated, sharper this time. Richard reached for the laminated card with a trembling hand. Before start checklist, he mumbled. Parking brake. Set, Maya said, firmly. Throttles. Idle. Fuel pumps. On. They went through the list. Every response from Maya was crisp, professional, and perfect. Richard's voice was a monotone drone of humiliation. As they taxied out to the runway, the rain lashed against the windshield. Maya handled the tiller with her left hand, steering the massive jet with a gentle, precise touch. Richard sat with his arms crossed, staring out the window, boiling with a rage that was slowly turning into a dangerous, dark plan. He wouldn't let this happen. He wouldn't let her win. Tower. Gulfstream 770 Mike Sierra, holding short runway 19, ready for departure. Richard said into the radio, his voice sounding hollow. 0 Mike Sierra, cleared for takeoff, runway 19. Climb and maintain 3,000, the controller replied. Maya pushed the throttles forward. The Rolls-Royce engines roared to life, pressing them back into their seats. The jet surged forward. V1, Richard called out reluctantly. Rotate. Maya pulled back on the yoke. The G650ER lifted into the gray sky, leaving the ground, and Richard's dignity far behind. The climb to cruising altitude was excruciating. Standard cockpit discipline, known as the sterile cockpit rule, mandates that no non-essential conversation take place below 10,000 feet. Usually this is for safety. Today it was a mercy. Once they passed 10,000 feet and the fasten seatbelt sign chimed off, the silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Maya engaged the autopilot, her eyes scanning the primary flight display. She was in her element. The sky didn't care about race or gender. It only respected physics and competence, and Maya was exceptional at both. Richard, however, was stewing. He was watching her every move, waiting for a mistake. He adjusted the radar tilt aggressively. Stop touching the radar, Maya said without looking at him. I have it set to scan the cell developing over Nova Scotia. It's set too low, Richard snapped. You're scanning ground clutter. You don't know how to use this system. The tilt is at 1.5 degrees down. Given our altitude of 41,000 feet and the curvature of the Earth, that is the optimal setting to see the convective activity ahead. Maya recited calmly. Do the math, Richard. Or do you want me to teach you basic trigonometry? Richard grit his teeth. She was right. He knew she was right. That made it worse. You think you're smart, Richard muttered. Daddy bought you a company, and now you think you're an aviator. You're a fraud. You're going to get us killed. My father was a mechanic, Richard, Maya said softly. He fixed cars. He died when I was 12. I paid for flight school by working 3 jobs. I bought this company with money I made developing aviation software. I patented a routing algorithm that saves airlines millions in fuel. I earned every dime. And I earned this seat. She turned to him. What have you earned, Richard, besides a reputation for being a nightmare to work with? Richard didn't answer. He couldn't process a world where a young black woman was not only his boss but intellectually superior to him. It broke his narrative. So he decided to break her flight. I need to use the lavatory, Richard announced abruptly. Go ahead, Maya said, but check on the passenger first. Richard unbuckled and stormed out of the cockpit. In the cabin, Harrison Thorne was working on a laptop, a half-eaten fruit plate beside him. The cabin was luxurious, quiet, and stable. Richard approached him, leaning over with a conspiratorial whisper. Mr. Thorne, everything okay back here? Fine, Vance, Harrison said without looking up. Look, I just want to apologize for the tension. Richard lied smoothly. You have to understand, Ms. Sterling is very inexperienced. She's struggling a bit with the crosswinds up there. The autopilot is doing most of the work, but I'm having to monitor her closely. It's a safety issue. Harrison stopped typing. He looked up over his reading glasses. Is that so? Yes, sir. I didn't want to alarm you, but she's erratic. I'm doing my best to keep things smooth. But frankly, she bought her way into the seat. She's not one of us. Harrison closed his laptop slowly. He stared at Richard with an unreadable expression. Interesting. You're saying she's incompetent? I'm saying she's a risk. Richard nodded eagerly. When we land in London, I can arrange for a different crew for your return leg. I have contacts. We can get rid of her. I'll keep that in mind, Harrison said neutrally. Thank you, Richard. Richard walked back to the cockpit, feeling a surge of triumph. He had planted the seed. If the client complained, the Board of Investors, if there were any, or the FAA, would have to listen. He could claim she was reckless. He could destroy her credibility. He re-entered the cockpit and strapped in. Thorne is nervous, Richard lied. He asked why the climb was so rough. I told him it was clear air turbulence, covering for your heavy hands. Maya didn't react. She pointed to the center screen. We have a warning light on the left hydraulic system. Low pressure. Richard looked. The amber light was glowing. LHYD press low. See? Richard shouted, jumping on the opportunity. You broke it. You pushed the engines too hard on the climb. That's not how hydraulics work, Richard, Maya said calmly, though her pulse was quickening. It's a seal failure. We're losing fluid. We need to run the QRH, Quick Reference Handbook. I told you this plane wasn't ready, Richard panicked. He grabbed the handbook, his hands shaking. We need to divert. We need to land immediately. Gander is the closest airport. We are not diverting for a secondary hydraulic failure, Maya said. The system has redundancy. We have the PTU power transfer unit and the electric backup. We continue to London. You're insane, Richard yelled. You're risking the billionaire's life to save face. I am declaring an emergency. He reached for the radio button on the yoke. Mayday, mayday. Maya's hand shot out and clamped over his wrist. Her grip was iron. You will not declare an emergency, she hissed. We are fully operational. If you declare a mayday for a minor fault, you will ground this plane in Newfoundland for 3 days waiting for parts. Thorne misses his merger. We lose the contract. We follow the checklist. Now read it to me. Proper procedure. Or so help me God, Richard, I will have you arrested for hijacking upon arrival. Richard stared at her. Her eyes were blazing. He saw no fear there, only absolute command. He pulled his hand back. He looked at the amber light. He looked at the checklist. Step 1. Richard Reed, his voice trembling. Hydraulic pump switch. Off. Switch off, Maya confirmed, flipping the switch. They worked through the problem. Maya flew the plane manually to get a feel for the control stiffness without the primary hydraulic assist. She compensated effortlessly. The plane remained steady. Richard watched her. He watched her hands move with delicate precision. He watched her scan the instruments. He realized, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that she wasn't just good. She was better than him. She was flying a crippled jet with more finesse than he flew a healthy one. But his ego wouldn't let him accept it. He convinced himself it was luck. And as the coast of Ireland appeared on the navigation display hours later, Richard decided he had one last card to play. The landing. The weather in London was atrocious. Fog, rain, and crosswinds gusting to 40 knots. It was a captain's landing conditions that required the highest level of skill. The weather at Luton is below minimums for a Cat 1 approach, Richard said, checking the ACARS data. We have to divert to Stansted. We have fuel for Luton, Maya said. We're doing a Cat 2 approach. The autopilot can handle it, but I'm going to hand fly it. You can't hand fly a G650 in zero visibility with a hydraulic failure, Richard screamed. Let me do it. Give me the controls. I have more experience in bad weather. No, Maya said. I am the pilot in command. You're going to kill us. London approach. Gulfstream 0 Mike Sierra, establishing localizer runway 26. Maya spoke into the radio, ignoring him. 0 Mike Sierra, cleared for approach. Wind 240 at 35, gusting 45. RVR, runway visual range, is 600 meters. It was brutal. The plane was being tossed around like a toy. Maya wrestled the yoke, correcting for the violent gusts. Richard sat there, his hands hovering near the controls. Just let her fail, he thought. If she bounces it or goes off the runway, she's done. I'll take over at the last second and be the hero. 500 feet, the automated voice called out. Stable, Maya said. You're too high, Richard lied. Get down! Get down! He was trying to confuse her. Maya ignored him. She was glued to the instruments. 200. Minimums, Richard called out. Go around! You can't see the runway. Go around! He reached for the throttles to push them forward, to force a missed approach and prove she couldn't land it. Visual, Maya said. Through the swirling gray mist, the approach lights pierced through a glorious rabbit run of strobes leading to the runway. Richard froze. She had found it perfectly. Maya cut the throttles. The plane settled. She kicked the rudder to align the nose with the center line, fighting the massive crosswind. Bang. The tires kissed the wet pavement. It wasn't just a landing. It was a statement. The plane stuck to the runway, decelerating smoothly. Reverse thrust, Maya commanded. Richard was too stunned to move. Maya reached over and engaged the reversers herself. They slowed to a taxi speed. Maya turned off the runway and contacted ground control. Welcome to London, Richard, she said, her voice devoid of triumph, just pure exhaustion. Now get on the radio and call for a tug. Since we have no hydraulics for steering, we need a tow to the stand. Richard picked up the mic. He felt sick. He had tried to sabotage her. He had lied to the passenger. And she had still executed a perfect flight. But as they taxied to the private terminal, Richard saw police cars waiting near the FBO. He smirked. Finally. Looks like the authorities are here, Richard laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. They must have found out about the ownership dispute. Or maybe Thorne called them about your reckless flying. He unbuckled his belt. I'll go talk to them. I'll try to keep you out of jail, Maya. But you're definitely losing your license. Maya didn't look at the police cars. She was shutting down the engines. Those aren't for me, Richard, she said quietly. The stairs of the Gulfstream G650ER hummed as they extended down to the wet tarmac of London Luton Airport. The fog was thick, swirling around the blue taxiway lights, giving the scene an eerie, cinematic quality. 3 police cruisers were parked in a semicircle near the nose of the aircraft, their blue lights flashing silently against the gray dusk. Standing next to them were 4 officers from the Bedfordshire Police and 2 men in dark suits who looked like aviation authority officials. Inside the cockpit, Richard Vance was frantic. He was unbuckling his seatbelt with fumbling, sweaty hands, his mind racing to construct the narrative that would save him. He had convinced himself that Maya was the villain here. She had stolen the plane. She had falsified the ownership documents. She had endangered the billionaire. He was the hero who had safely monitored a rogue pilot across the Atlantic. "I'm going down first," Richard snapped, grabbing his jacket and his flight cap. He needed to look the part. He needed to be the authority figure. "I need to brief the police on your behavior before you try to spin some sob story." Maya sat motionless in the left seat. She had finished the shutdown checklist. The engines were spooling down, a dying whine that faded into the sound of the wind. She slowly took off her headset and placed it on the glare shield. She didn't look at Richard. She looked out the window at the police officers. "Go ahead, Richard," she said, her voice terrifyingly quiet. "Don't keep them waiting." Richard sneered at her one last time, a look of pure, distilled hatred. "Enjoy the view, sweetheart. Next time you see a cockpit, it'll be on a prison transport plane." He stormed out of the cockpit, pushing past Sarah, the flight attendant, who was trembling near the galley. "Get out of my way," Richard barked at her. He reached the main cabin door. Harrison Thorne was standing there, buttoning his raincoat. The billionaire looked calm, almost bored. "Mr. Thorne," Richard said, putting a hand on the man's shoulder, a breach of protocol he was too panicked to notice. "Let me handle the authorities. I'll make sure your name is kept out of the press. I'll tell them you are a hostage to her incompetence." Harrison looked at Richard's hand on his shoulder, then up at Richard's face. He didn't say a word. He just stepped aside and gestured for Richard to exit first. Richard took that as a sign of submission. He puffed out his chest, fixed his tie, and marched down the stairs. The cold London air hit him. He walked straight toward the lead police officer, a tall sergeant with a grim face. "Officer!" Richard called out, waving his hand. "Thank God you're here. I am Captain Richard Vance. I want to file an immediate report against the woman in the cockpit. She has hijacked this aircraft. She is mentally unstable and attempted to crash us upon landing. I demand she be removed immediately." Richard stopped, 3 feet from the sergeant, waiting for the validation he felt he deserved. He waited for the officers to rush the stairs and drag Maya out, but nobody moved toward the plane. The sergeant looked at Richard. Then he looked down at a clipboard in his hand. Then he looked back at Richard. "Are you Richard Vance?" the sergeant asked, his accent thick and unamused. "Yes, I am the captain," Richard insisted. "Did you hear me?" The woman inside. "Mr. Vance," the sergeant interrupted, stepping forward. "I am arresting you on suspicion of endangering the safety of an aircraft under the Air Navigation Order 2016 and for interference with a flight crew member." Richard froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The words didn't make sense. "What? No, you're confused. She's the one." Furthermore, one of the men in suits stepped forward, flashing a badge from the UK Civil Aviation Authority, CAA. "We have received a priority communication from the FAA in the United States. Your medical certificate and pilot's license have been temporarily suspended pending an investigation into gross negligence and attempted sabotage." "Sabotage?" Richard squeaked. "I didn't. I saved the plane." "Turn around, please," the sergeant said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "This is a mistake." Richard screamed, backing away. "Mr. Thorne! Mr. Thorne! Tell them!" Richard spun around to face the aircraft. Harrison Thorne was descending the stairs, holding a black umbrella. He walked slowly, elegantly, down to the tarmac. Maya Sterling followed him, wearing her blazer and her captain's hat. She looked impeccable, untouched by the chaos. Richard pointed a shaking finger at the billionaire. "Mr. Thorne, tell them she almost killed us. Tell them I had to take over." Harrison Thorne stopped. He looked at the police, then at Richard. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone. He tapped the screen and held it up. "Officer," Harrison said, his voice cutting through the wind, "I would like to submit this as evidence." "What is that, sir?" the sergeant asked. "It's a recording," Harrison said, his eyes locking onto Richard's terrified face. "You see, Vance, I'm a tech investor. I know how these jets work better than you do. This G650 is equipped with a cabin audio system that allows passengers to listen to the cockpit communications channel. It's usually for aviation enthusiasts to hear air traffic control." Richard's face went white. The color drained out of him so fast he looked like a corpse. "I turned it on shortly after takeoff because I sensed tension," Harrison continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I heard everything. I heard Miss Sterling following protocol. I heard you verbally abusing her. I heard you panic, and most importantly..." Harrison tapped the phone screen. Richard's own voice, tinny but unmistakable, played from the speaker. "Go around. You can't see the runway. Go around." Then the sound of Richard scrambling, and Maya's voice, "Visual." Then the sound of the landing. Harrison stopped the playback. "I also heard the moment you tried to force the throttles forward to cause a missed approach. I saw the telemetry data on my monitor. You tried to destabilize the aircraft at 200 feet. That is attempted murder, Vance." Richard's knees gave out. He slumped, caught only by the two officers who grabbed his arms. Richard stammered, tears welling up in his eyes. "I just wanted to show she couldn't handle it." "She handled it perfectly," Harrison said coldly. "She owns the plane. She flew the plane. The only baggage on this flight was you." The sergeant nodded to his officers. "Take him away." "No, you can't do this," Richard wailed as they dragged him toward the cruiser. "I have 30 years. I'm a captain. I'm a captain." He thrashed, his boots scraping against the asphalt, a pathetic figure stripping himself of his last shred of dignity. Maya walked past him. She didn't stop. She didn't taunt him. She stopped in front of him just as they were shoving him into the back seat. Richard looked up at her, his eyes red and pleading. "Maya, please. Don't let them take my license. It's all I have. I have a mortgage. Please." Maya looked down at him. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was pity. "You didn't lose your license because of me, Richard," she said softly. "You lost it because you couldn't stand the idea that I was your equal. You crashed your own life." She signaled to the officer. He slammed the car door shut, silencing Richard's screams. 3 months later, the relentless freezing rain that had battered Teterboro Airport on that fateful Tuesday morning seemed like a distant memory, a nightmare washed away by the passage of time. Now, the New Jersey spring had arrived in full force. The sky above the airfield was a piercing, limitless blue, broken only by the white contrails of jets climbing toward the stratosphere. Inside the Meridian Aviation FBO, the atmosphere had undergone a transformation as radical as the weather. 3 months ago, this lounge had been a place of hushed whispers and rigid, fearful hierarchies, dominated by the heavy footsteps of men like Richard Vance. It had been a club where seniority was weaponized and diversity was tolerated with a roll of the eyes. Today, the air hummed with a different kind of energy, precision, efficiency, and a palpable sense of optimism. Maya Sterling sat in the corner office, a space that commanded a panoramic view of the tarmac. This office had once belonged to the previous owner, a man who treated the charter business as a hobby. It had been filled with dusty model airplanes and cigar humidors. Now, it was stripped clean, redesigned with minimalist furniture and glass walls that offered total transparency. The nameplate on the door was simple, engraved in brushed steel. Maya Sterling, CEO, Sterling Aviation. Maya leaned back in her ergonomic chair, swiveling slightly to look at the 3 large monitors on her desk. She wasn't wearing a pilot's uniform today. She was dressed in a tailored cream business suit, her hair pulled back in a sharp, professional bun. She looked every inch the executive, but her eyes still scanned the data with the rapid-fire processing speed of an aviator. There was a soft knock on the glass door. "Come in," Maya said, her voice carrying a natural authority that didn't need to be raised. Gary O'Connell, the chief pilot, stepped inside. He looked like a different man. The perpetual sweat that used to bead on his forehead when Richard was around was gone. His shoulders were unhunched, and he carried a tablet with an ease that suggested he finally enjoyed his job again. "Good morning, boss," Gary said, placing a steaming cup of artisan coffee on her desk. Black, no sugar, just how she took it. "I have the Q1 financial reports and the maintenance logs for the new Challenger 350s. "Thanks, Gary," Maya said, taking a sip. "Give me the headline." "How are we doing on the Thorn account?" Gary grinned, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "It's honestly unbelievable, Maya. After the incident, after the way you handled the landing and the police at Luton, Harrison Thorn didn't just stay with us. He became our biggest evangelist." Gary tapped his tablet, casting the numbers onto the large wall-mounted screen. The graph showed a vertical green line shooting upward. "Thorn referred 3 other board members from his tech conglomerate to us last week," Gary explained, his voice animated. "He told them that Sterling Aviation is the only charter company that prioritizes competence over ego. That phrase is actually in the vendor contract now. We are currently projecting a 300% revenue increase by the end of the fiscal year." Maya nodded slowly, absorbing the numbers. "And the fleet expansion?" "We secured the leases on 2 more G650s this morning," Gary confirmed. "We simply didn't have enough birds to handle the demand. You were right, Maya. The market was starving for a reliable professional operator. The old boys' club wasn't just toxic. It was bad for business." "It's amazing what happens when you treat people with respect," Maya murmured, turning her gaze back to the window. "You attract high-value clients who value quality." "Speaking of quality," Gary said, swiping to a new screen, "the new pilot candidates are waiting in the conference room. We have 12 applicants for the 3 open captain slots. Per your new policy, I've scrubbed their names, photos, and demographic data from the resumes. You're seeing nothing but flight hours, type ratings, and safety records." "Blind hiring," Maya said with satisfaction. "It's the only way to ensure we never have another Richard Vance in a cockpit." "It's working," Gary admitted. "The candidate pool is incredible. We have former military fighter pilots, commercial veterans, test pilots. And because we aren't filtering by traditional biases, we're seeing talent that other companies overlooked." Gary paused then. The celebratory mood in the room shifted slightly. He hesitated, his hand hovering over his pocket. "What is it, Gary?" Maya asked, sensing the change in his demeanor. She knew his tells. Gary reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a white envelope. It was standard-issue stationery, cheap and rough-textured. The stamp was official, and the return address was stamped in red ink. Federal Correctional Institution, Fort Dix, New Jersey. He placed it gently on the glass desk, sliding it toward her. "This came in the mail this morning," Gary said quietly. "It's from him." Maya didn't move. She stared at the envelope. The handwriting was familiar, jagged, aggressive loops. To Captain Maya Sterling. "He's awaiting sentencing." Gary filled in the silence. "The federal charges stuck: interference with a flight crew, reckless endangerment, and false reporting to the FAA. The lawyers say he's looking at 3 to 5 years, plus a lifetime ban from holding an airman's certificate. He'll never fly anything bigger than a paper airplane again." Maya looked at the letter. She could imagine what was inside. Was it an apology? Unlikely. Richard was a narcissist. In his mind, he was probably still the victim. Was it a plea for help? A request for money? Or just more venom, scribbled from a prison cell? She remembered the way he had looked at her on the tarmac in London. The desperation. The smallness of a man who had built his entire identity on being superior to her, only to have that foundation crumbled by his own incompetence. "Do you want to read it?" Gary asked. "Or should I shred it?" Maya reached out and touched the corner of the envelope. For a split second, she felt a ghost of the old anger. The memories of him silencing her, mocking her, threatening her career. But then, the feeling evaporated. It was replaced by something far more powerful: indifference. Richard Vance was the past. He was a relic of an era that she had single-handedly dismantled. giving him her attention now, even for the 2 minutes it would take to read his scrawled excuses, was an expenditure of energy he no longer deserved. "No," Maya said firmly. She picked up the envelope and dropped it, unopened, into the blue recycling bin beneath her desk. "He had his chance to speak to me," Maya said, her voice cool and final. "He chose to scream instead. I'm done listening." Gary nodded, looking relieved. "Understood. I'll let the candidates know you'll be in shortly." Gary left the room, closing the door softly. Maya stood up. She walked over to the window and pressed her hand against the cool glass. Below her, the ground crew was towing a gleaming Gulfstream G650ER, tail number N770MS, toward the fuel farm. It was the same jet. The machine that had almost been the stage for her destruction was now the flagship of her empire. She grabbed her blazer and walked out of the office. As she moved through the FBO lounge, the change was undeniable. The receptionists, who had once been too terrified of Richard to make eye contact, looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Miss Sterling," the young woman at the desk chirped. "Morning, Kelly," Maya replied. She walked out onto the tarmac, the sun warming her face. The smell of Jet A fuel, usually harsh to the uninitiated, smelled like perfume to her. It smelled like freedom. She approached the aircraft. A young first officer, a new hire named Elias, was conducting the exterior walk-around. He saw her coming and immediately snapped to attention, not out of fear, but out of genuine reverence. "Captain Sterling," Elias said. "She's ready for the Tokyo run." "Everything is green." Maya walked up to the nose of the massive jet. She ran her palm along the cold, smooth aluminum of the fuselage. She looked at her reflection in the polished metal. She didn't see a diversity hire. She didn't see the little girl Richard had tried to belittle. She saw a survivor. She saw a leader. She saw a woman who had taken the stones thrown at her and used them to build a castle. She turned to Elias, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Carry on, First Officer," she said with a smile. "The sky is waiting." Maya turned and walked back toward the terminal, her heels clicking rhythmically on the tarmac. She had a company to run, pilots to hire, and a future to build. The turbulence was behind her. The air ahead was clean, smooth, and hers to command. And that is the story of how arrogance and prejudice crashed and burned at 40,000 feet. Richard Vance thought his title, his gender, and his skin color gave him the divine right to rule the cockpit. He believed that the world would always bend to his ego. But he forgot the golden rule of aviation. Gravity doesn't care who you are, and neither does the truth. He underestimated Maya Sterling not because she lacked skill. She had more talent in her little finger than he had in his entire body, but because he was blinded by his own bigotry. He couldn't see the pilot. He could only see the stereotype. In the end, Maya didn't just defeat him. She outflew him, outsmarted him, and took his seat, legally, permanently, and spectacularly. It's a powerful reminder that in today's world, competence is the only currency that matters. You can't fake your way through the storm, and those who refuse to adapt, like Richard, will be left standing on the tarmac while the rest of us take flight. Wow, what a ride! I still get chills thinking about that moment when the police slapped those cuffs on him. If you felt the tension in that cockpit and cheered when Maya finally took control, please hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow and tells YouTube you want more stories like this. What do you think about the ending? Did Richard deserve a longer sentence? Or was the humiliation of losing his wings the ultimate punishment? And would you have opened that letter? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories about justice served cold, karma hitting hard, and underdogs taking over, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.